The moment my coworker looked me dead in the eyes and told me to stay away from her husband, that's when I knew I'd made the right call. Because what she did while that man was grieving his own mother's death was something I will never be able to forget. Here's what happened. So I'm going to use fake names for this. Let's call my colleague Jenny. Her husband, we'll call him Mark. And then there's Mark's mother, Jenny's mother-in-law. I know Jenny from work. Her husband Mark, he's in his 30s, and he's a really nice guy. He's kind of meek and not very outspoken, but once you get to know him, he's one of the most humble and friendly people you'll ever meet. I've known both of them for a few years now, and I know Mark almost as well as I know Jenny. It was no secret that Mark's mother and Jenny never got along. Jenny would always complain to us at work about whatever petty fights or arguments they got into. She made his mother seem pretty horrible, but I always kept in mind that I was only hearing one side of the story. I really didn't like it, but I ignored it most of the time. It was mostly the other people at work, usually the other women, who liked to hear and talk about that kind of stuff. Mark's mother had been sick for a while. She was pretty old. And she passed away last week. We'd known it was coming for some time, and Mark was absolutely devastated. He was a wreck of a man. I was there at her funeral and I was there to comfort him. His wife was also there, seeming very comforting and supportive. Now here's where things take a turn. The day after the funeral, Jenny and some of the other girls from work were going to a bar to have drinks. But this wasn't just a casual night out. They were going to celebrate her mother-in-law's death. Jenny seemed quite excited about it and showed absolutely no remorse. Now I know they didn't have a good relationship. But from my point of view, this was disgusting. A woman died. The mother of her husband. A woman her husband loved dearly. Her husband, a man she supposedly loves dearly. I thought to myself, what the hell, this is sick. But I didn't say anything. They went off to the bar and I was there in the office feeling absolutely disgusted. I think it's a vile thing to do. No matter how bad their relationship was in life, you do not celebrate the death of someone your husband loved, especially his own mother. It's sickening in every way. I was sure Mark didn't know. He was probably still grieving. He was a complete wreck when I last saw him. I felt like I should tell him. I had a strong inclination to tell him. I felt he had the right to know. His wife was doing this behind his back because she thought it wouldn't affect him, but it was pretty gross in my opinion. I knew it would probably make him feel worse. I knew it would probably destroy their marriage and that I would be responsible for that. But I felt he had a right to know. He's my friend. I care about him. And he deserves to know. I was about 90% sure I wanted to tell him. But I wasn't completely certain. I was well aware of the repercussions, that I could be destroying a marriage with 2 kids involved, as well as destroying any friendship I had with Jenny. But I kept going back and forth. Should I tell him? Should I keep my mouth shut? If I were in his shoes, I'd want to know. But then I thought about what people had told me. Some said Jenny was entitled to have her own feelings about her mother-in-law's death, and that she was dealing with it in her own way while still being there for her husband. They said I had no idea what was really going on in that relationship and that it wasn't my place to get involved. And look. I understand that perspective. But I still thought it was extremely inappropriate, rude, and insensitive to celebrate the death of the mother of someone you supposedly love. To me, it felt like she had no respect for her husband whatsoever. Mark is my friend, and to be completely honest, I lost all respect for Jenny. Other people warned me to stay out of it. They said I didn't know the full picture of what went on between Jenny and her mother-in-law. That it wasn't my place to act as the morality police and insert myself into their personal business. Some said I was within my rights to stop being friends with Jenny, but that I was absolutely wrong to involve myself in her marriage. I also got some private messages from other guys saying they knew if they spoke up publicly they'd get shut down, but that if they were Mark, they'd want to know too. So here's what I did. I invited Mark over to my house. I knew he'd been in a terrible mood lately, so I figured I'd have him come over to relax. We had a few beers, talked things out. I wanted to tell him. I was going to tell him. But this poor guy, he was in such a mess. He was so visibly upset and miserable that I couldn't bring myself to add another layer to his burdens. I didn't hold back to protect Jenny. I think she's a terrible person for celebrating the death of his mother. I held back because I didn't want to pile more grief onto a man who was already drowning in it. So no. I didn't tell him that his wife had celebrated the death of his own beloved mother while he was at home grieving. Instead, we talked about other things. Life. Family. Whatever came to mind. At one point I mentioned that it seemed like Jenny had been very supportive of him through all this. He laughed. And then, he started telling me the truth of the situation. He said he knows Jenny and his mother always hated each other. And he said she's been anything but empathetic, except on a superficial level. He told me that at times, he felt she could barely hide her glee. I told him that was terrible, but I didn't really add anything beyond that. Then he told me they'd been fighting since his mother's death, and it had been getting worse. Part of it, he said, stemmed from what he felt was her joy at the whole situation. Apparently the fighting was pretty bad and it had caused a real strain in their marriage. I suggested marriage counseling. He kind of balked at the idea. So I just told him that if he ever wanted a friend to talk to, I was here for him. At this point, I knew if I was ever going to say something, this was the moment. But I still didn't. Then he told me something that caught me off guard. He said he'd heard from one of the other guys at our workplace, who's also a friend of his, that Jenny had been acting gleeful around the office and telling the other girls about his mother's death. He looked at me and asked if it was true. I said yeah. Then I kind of backtracked a little and said I don't really pay attention to much that goes on around work and I don't engage in gossip the way some of the other people do, so I could have just misheard. I didn't want to make things worse for him. But he'd asked me directly, and I wasn't going to lie to my friend's face. He stayed at my place for a while longer, just relaxing, and then he went home. The next morning at work, Jenny came in and she was in an obviously sour mood. She walked straight up to my cubicle and she was clearly angry. She asked me, "What did you talk about with my husband yesterday?" I told her it was between me and him. She said something like, "He's my husband, stay away from him." I don't remember the exact words. And that's when I'd had enough. I told her. I know that she went out to the bar to celebrate the death of her husband's mother. And I told her I thought it was disgusting. And that I'd lost all respect for her. Then I told her to go away and not to bother me because I had work to do. She left in a bad mood and that was the end of that. I hope I don't hear from her again. I honestly lost all respect for that woman. I think she's a bad person. If their marriage fails for whatever reason, it would be her fault for being such a callous person and celebrating the death of her husband's mother. I still can't wrap my head around what kind of person would do that. Mark already knew something was off. He could feel it. He could see the glee she was barely hiding. The other people at work had already started talking. It was only a matter of time before he found out the full picture. I didn't tell him to hurt Jenny. I didn't tell him to blow up their marriage. When he asked me directly, I just couldn't lie to my friend. That's all it was. Some people told me I was wrong. That I stuck my nose where it didn't belong. That I might have helped ruin a relationship and damaged my own reputation at work. One person even told me that networking is a huge part of success in a professional setting, and that Jenny was well liked, and she'd probably be telling anyone who would listen that I tried to wreck her marriage. And maybe they're right about some of that. Jenny is one of the more social people at work. I don't socialize that much, so honestly, I don't really care. But I'll tell you this. If my mother had just died, and my wife was out at a bar raising glasses and celebrating with her friends while I was at home falling apart, I would want someone to tell me. I would want to know exactly who I was married to. And I think deep down, Mark already knew.